The evening light was fading as Robert pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Plate Diner. It was Thursday, and Thursday meant pancake night, the one routine his 6-year-old son Alex seemed to truly enjoy. Robert checked his phone one last time before turning to look at his boy in the back seat, quiet as always, gazing out the window. "Ready for pancakes, buddy?" Robert asked, not expecting a response. Alex hadn't spoken a word in the 2 years since the accident that took his mother's life. Alex unbuckled his seatbelt and waited patiently for his father to open the door. In his small hands, he clutched the tablet that had become his voice, an app with pictures and symbols that allowed him to communicate his basic needs. Robert had spent a small fortune on specialists, therapists, and the best schools, but nothing had broken through the wall of silence that surrounded his son. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the diner. It wasn't fancy, just a local place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of coffee and syrup in the air. But it was consistent, and consistency was what Alex needed. "Hey there, you two," a warm voice called out as they slid into their usual booth by the window. It was Nina, their regular waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a smile that seemed to light up even Alex's solemn face. "Let me guess. Chocolate chip pancakes for the little man and black coffee for Dad?" Robert nodded with a tired smile. He'd been up since 5 that morning dealing with a crisis at his software company. Being a single parent and running a business that employed over 200 people left little time for sleep. "Rough day?" Nina asked as she poured his coffee without waiting for his order. "Just the usual," Robert replied, not bothering to explain that usual meant back-to-back meetings with investors, firing his marketing director, and getting another email from Alex's school about his lack of progress. He didn't mention that he was one of the wealthiest men in town. Here, in his worn jeans and plain button-down shirt, he was just another tired dad. As Nina walked away to place their order, Robert pulled out his laptop. There were contracts to review before tomorrow's meeting. Alex, meanwhile, opened a game on his tablet, his small fingers moving across the screen with practiced precision. A few minutes later, Nina returned with a glass of water for Alex. As she set it down, her elbow caught the edge of the tablet, sending it sliding across the table. Water splashed, and in the scramble to catch the tablet, Nina knocked over the sugar dispenser. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry," she gasped, quickly grabbing napkins. What happened next made Robert freeze, his hand halfway to his coffee cup. As Nina fumbled with the napkins, she made a silly face at Alex and said, "Oopsie, what a mess I've made." And Alex giggled. It was a small sound, barely audible above the diner's background noise, but it was a sound. A voluntary sound. The first Robert had heard from his son in 2 years. Nina didn't seem to notice anything unusual. She continued cleaning up, talking to Alex in a natural way. "Can you help me put these sugar packets back? 1, 2, 3, Alex tried, his voice rusty from disuse. Nina paused, a bright smile spreading across her face. "That's right, 3. High five, buddy." She held up her hand, and to Robert's astonishment, Alex gave her a small high five. Robert's coffee sat forgotten as he watched Nina interact with his son. She wasn't doing anything particularly special, just treating Alex like any other kid. But somehow she'd accomplished in minutes what expensive specialists hadn't managed in years. Through dinner, Robert observed them together. Nina had a natural way with Alex, using hand gestures alongside her words. She'd mime eating the pancakes, making exaggerated, yummy faces that made Alex's lips twitch into what might have been a smile. When she brought extra syrup, she helped Alex trace the letter S in the air. S for syrup. And incredibly, Alex tried to mimic the motion. When they finished their meal, Robert lingered longer than usual, ordering dessert he didn't want just to watch this miracle unfold. Nina chatted with Alex as if his responses were completely normal, filling his silence with cheerful conversation, but leaving spaces where his answers would go. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, Alex would fill those spaces with small sounds. As the dinner crowd thinned out, Robert finally asked, "Have you worked with children before? Special needs children, I mean." Nina looked up from where she was showing Alex how to fold a paper napkin into a simple boat. "Oh, well, not professionally. I'm studying speech therapy at the community college. Working here helps pay the bills, but it's taking forever to finish my degree." She smiled at Alex. "Your son is a smart cookie. He's just got his own way of seeing the world, right, buddy?" Robert watched as his son, who had been diagnosed with selective mutism following the trauma of losing his mother, reached for Nina's hand to help him fold another corner of the napkin boat. "Do you work with him at home?" Nina asked. "Simple stuff like this can help. Songs, games, anything that makes communication fun rather than pressure." Robert felt a pang of guilt. Between work and researching treatments, he'd delegated most of Alex's daily care to a revolving door of nannies and housekeepers. He couldn't remember the last time they'd just played together. "Not enough," he admitted. Nina nodded without judgment. "It's hard being a single parent. My mom raised 3 of us on her own, so I've seen how tough it is." As they prepared to leave, Alex surprised both adults by holding out his tablet to Nina. On the screen, he'd pulled up the image for "Thank you. You're very welcome." "Alex," Nina said, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "See you next Thursday?" Alex nodded, and Robert felt something shift inside his chest. A knot of hopelessness loosening for the first time in years. In the car on the way home, Robert glanced repeatedly in the rearview mirror at his son. Alex was looking out the window, but something was different. There was a lightness to him that hadn't been there before. As he tucked Alex into bed that night, Robert made a decision. He'd watched his son respond to Nina in a way he hadn't responded to anyone since the accident. He didn't know what it was about this waitress, her natural approach, her student training, or just her personality, but something was working. Robert sat in his home office long after Alex had fallen asleep, looking at the framed photo on his desk, himself, Alex, and his late wife Lisa on their last family vacation. "I need help," he whispered to Lisa's smiling image. "I think I might have found it in the strangest place." He made a note in his calendar to return to the diner the following day, alone. He needed to talk to Nina. Money could buy many things. The best doctors, the most exclusive schools, this sprawling house with its empty rooms, but it couldn't buy the sound of his son's voice. Yet somehow a waitress at a pancake diner had coaxed out what all his wealth couldn't. For the first time in 2 years, Robert went to bed with hope flickering in his heart. Tomorrow he would make Nina an offer that might change everything for Alex, for himself, and for the young woman who had unknowingly accomplished what seemed impossible. Robert arrived at the Blue Plate Diner the next afternoon, deliberately timing his visit during the mid-afternoon lull. The lunch crowd had cleared out, and the dinner rush was still hours away. Only a few tables were occupied, mostly by elderly regulars nursing cups of coffee. He spotted Nina wiping down a table near the back, her dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. She looked different in the daylight, younger, maybe even a bit tired. Without Alex beside him, Robert felt oddly out of place. "Table for one?" the hostess asked. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Nina if she has a moment." The hostess raised an eyebrow but called Nina over. Recognition flickered across Nina's face as she approached. "Hey there, you're Alex's dad, right? Is everything okay?" Concern immediately shadowed her features. "Everything's fine. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes. It's about Alex." Nina glanced at the nearly empty restaurant, then nodded. "My break's in 15 minutes. There's a coffee shop next door if you don't mind waiting." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other at a small table, steam rising from their cups. Nina had changed out of her uniform into a simple t-shirt with her college logo faded across the front. "So what's this about?" she asked, stirring honey into her tea. "Is Alex all right?" Robert took a deep breath. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head, but now that the moment had arrived, he wasn't sure where to begin. "I want to thank you for yesterday," he started. "What you did with Alex. It might not seem like much to you, but it was huge. He hasn't made sounds like that since his mother died 2 years ago." Nina's eyes widened. "I didn't realize. I could tell he was non-speaking, but I didn't know it was because of trauma. I'm so sorry about your wife." Robert nodded his thanks. "We've tried everything. The best specialists, therapists, alternative treatments. Nothing has worked. But yesterday you got him to respond in ways nobody has." Nina smiled softly. "Kids can sense when you're trying too hard. Sometimes they just need space to be themselves without feeling the pressure to perform." "That's exactly what his last therapist said," Robert replied. "But she couldn't get through to him either." He paused, gathering his courage. "I'm not sure if you know who I am." Nina tilted her head slightly. "Alex's dad?" The simplicity of her answer made him smile. "Yes, but I'm also the founder and CEO of Horizon Software." This time Nina's surprise was evident. Horizon was one of the largest employers in the region. Its sleek campus on the outskirts of town was impossible to miss. Oh, wow, you don't seem... She trailed off, embarrassed. Rich? Robert supplied. I try not to make it obvious, especially since he looked down at his coffee. Money doesn't solve everything. It hasn't helped Alex. Nina nodded slowly, waiting for him to continue. I have a proposition for you, Robert said finally. I'd like to hire you to work with Alex, as his caretaker, teacher, whatever you want to call it. The salary would cover your tuition and living expenses so you could focus on finishing your degree without working here. Nina's cup froze halfway to her lips. You want to hire me? But I'm not even qualified. I haven't finished my degree. I've never worked professionally with children with... You connected with my son, Robert interrupted gently. That's the only qualification I care about right now. Nina set her cup down carefully. That's very flattering, but I can't just... I have responsibilities. My classes, my apartment, my roommates, I've thought about that, Robert replied, pulling a folder from his briefcase. This is what I'm offering. Nina glanced at the paper he slid across the table. Her eyes widened as she saw the proposed salary. This is more than I'd make even after graduating, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It includes health insurance, paid time off, and a completion bonus when you finish your degree, Robert explained. You'd have your own suite in our home, but weekends off unless you choose otherwise. I've also spoken to the department head at your college. They're willing to work with your schedule for classes. Nina looked up, her expression shifting from shock to suspicion. You did all this since yesterday? Robert had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'm used to moving quickly when something's important. And nothing is more important to me than Alex. Nina pushed the paper back toward him. This is too much, too fast. You don't even know me. I could be anyone. I had you thoroughly background checked this morning, Robert admitted. You what? Nina's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. I know it seems invasive, Robert said quickly, but I'm talking about entrusting you with my son. I had to be sure. Nina crossed her arms. And what did this background check tell you? That you're taking twice the normal course load while working 2 jobs. That you volunteer at the Children's Hospital on Sundays. That you're sending money home to help your mother with your younger siblings. That you're exactly the kind of person I'd want around my son. Nina was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. Shh, Robert, please, Robert. I understand that you want to help Alex, but this feels, I don't know, wrong somehow, like you're trying to buy a solution. The words stung, but Robert couldn't deny their truth. Maybe I am, he admitted, but not the way you think. I'm not trying to buy your friendship with Alex. I'm trying to buy him time with someone who naturally knows how to reach him. Nina still looked unconvinced. What if it doesn't work? What if yesterday was just a fluke? Then we'll know we tried, Robert said simply. But I don't think it was a fluke. I think you have a gift with children like Alex, the kind of gift that can't be taught in any classroom. Nina bit her lip, considering. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course, Robert said, though disappointment coursed through him. He'd half expected her to agree on the spot. Take all the time you need. I should get back to work, Nina said, standing up. My break's over. Robert nodded, handing her his business card. My personal cell is on the back. Call me anytime. As he watched her walk away, Robert wondered if he'd miscalculated. Perhaps the offer had been too generous, too sudden. Or maybe Nina simply wasn't interested in becoming entangled in their complicated lives. The next Thursday, Robert brought Alex to the diner as usual. He hadn't heard from Nina all week, and he wasn't sure what to expect. As they walked in, he scanned the restaurant, his heart sinking when he didn't see her familiar face. Different server tonight, the hostess explained as she led them to their usual booth. Nina called in. Alex looked around, his disappointment evident even in his silence. He refused to use his tablet, instead staring out the window as if hoping Nina might appear. Their new server was perfectly pleasant, but the magic of the previous week was missing. Alex didn't respond to her attempts at conversation. He picked at his pancakes without enthusiasm. Robert felt the weight of failure pressing down on him once again. As they were finishing their meal, the bell above the door jingled. Alex's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert. Robert turned to see Nina hurrying through the door, still wearing her college sweatshirt and jeans instead of her uniform. Sorry I'm late, she said, slightly breathless as she slid into the booth beside Alex. Traffic was terrible coming back from campus. Alex's entire demeanor changed instantly. He sat up straighter, his eyes brightening. "You're not working tonight?" Robert asked, confused but hopeful. Nina shook her head. "No, I'm here as a customer." She turned to Alex with a smile. "I heard they have great pancakes here. Are they any good?" Alex nodded vigorously. "Good enough to eat every Thursday?" she asked. Another nod, more enthusiastic this time. "That's funny," Nina continued, as if they were having a normal conversation, "because I was thinking about having pancakes every day. At a really big house, with a really cool kid who might want to learn some fun new ways to talk." She glanced up at Robert. "If the offer's still open." Robert felt his throat tighten. "It is." Nina reached into her bag and pulled out a children's picture book. "I brought this for you, Alex. It's about a boy who finds his voice through music. I thought maybe we could read it together sometime." Alex stared at the book, then at Nina, then at his father. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for his tablet. Instead of using the picture symbols, he navigated to the keyboard function, something he rarely did. With painstaking care, he typed, "Yes." It was just one word. 3 letters on a screen, but in that moment it felt like everything. Robert met Nina's eyes across the table, gratitude and hope surging through him. "Well," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I guess we'd better get your things moved in this weekend." Nina smiled, reaching out to help Alex open his new book. "I don't have much. Just clothes, books, and about 1,000,000 ideas for helping this guy find his voice again." As they sat in the diner, making plans for this unexpected new chapter in their lives, Robert watched his son lean slightly against Nina's arm as she pointed to pictures in the book. For the first time in 2 years, the future didn't seem like an endless road of disappointment. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming gently on the diner's windows. But inside, at their small booth in the corner, something warm and hopeful was taking root. Something that no amount of money could have bought, but which might, just possibly, lead them all toward healing. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as Nina sat cross-legged on the floor of the spacious playroom, arranging colorful flashcards in a semicircle. 3 weeks had passed since she'd moved into the guest suite at Robert's sprawling hillside home, and she was still getting used to the sheer size of the place. The house was beautiful, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows with breathtaking views, but it felt oddly empty, as if it were a showroom rather than a home. Nina checked her watch. Alex would be up soon. He was an early riser, usually appearing in the kitchen around 6:30, tablet in hand. Unlike the house, Alex's room was warm and lived in, walls covered with space posters and shelves lined with books and toys. It was a child's room, the one space that felt truly inhabited. Robert's home office, on the other hand, looked like it belonged in a corporate headquarters, sleek, minimalist, and dominated by multiple computer monitors. That's where he spent most of his time, emerging for meals and brief conversations before disappearing again behind the heavy wooden door. The sound of small feet padding down the hallway made Nina look up with a smile. Alex appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching his tablet. "Good morning, sunshine," Nina said cheerfully. "Ready for our music time?" Alex nodded, moving to sit beside her on the colorful rug. Nina had quickly discovered that Alex responded best to activities involving rhythm and movement. She'd created a daily routine that started with music and ended with storytelling, with plenty of play-based learning in between. "Today we're going to try something new," she explained, pulling out a small drum. "This is all about conversation. When I tap, you tap back, like talking, but with sounds instead of words." She demonstrated, tapping out a simple pattern on the drum. Alex watched intently, then reached out hesitantly. His small fingers echoed her pattern, not perfectly, but recognizably. "That's it," Nina beamed. "Now you start." For the next 20 minutes, they carried on a percussive conversation, with Alex gradually growing more confident. Nina noticed that the corners of his mouth would turn up slightly when he created a pattern she found challenging to repeat, a glimpse of the playful child beneath the silence. From the doorway came the sound of a throat clearing. Robert stood there in his business attire, coffee in hand, watching them. "Sorry," he said when they both looked up. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Nina replied. "Join us, Alex just invented a Rio." Light, tricky rhythm I can barely keep up with. Robert shook his head with a regretful smile. Early meeting. I'll be back around 6. He hesitated, then added, Looks like fun, though. After he'd gone, Nina noticed Alex staring at the empty doorway, his earlier animation fading. She'd observed this pattern repeatedly. How Alex seemed to withdraw whenever his father was present, and how Robert, despite his obvious love for his son, didn't seem to know how to bridge the gap between them. Your dad works really hard, Nina said gently. But I bet he'd love to play drums with you sometime. Should we save some cool rhythms to show him later? Alex's response was a barely perceptible nod, but it was enough for Nina to continue. Great, now let's try adding some sounds with our drum beats. Like this, boom-ta, boom-ta. The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were for active, music-based activities. Afternoons often found them in the garden, where Nina had set up a small sensory area with water tables and textured materials. She'd noticed that Alex was more likely to vocalize outdoors, away from the stifling perfection of the house. Robert would occasionally watch them from his office window, a solitary figure behind glass, observing but rarely participating. Nina had tried inviting him to join their activities, but his responses were always the same. Too busy. Too many calls, maybe next time. One rainy afternoon, about 6 weeks after Nina had started, she was sitting with Alex in the kitchen making homemade Play-Doh. The house felt particularly empty with the sound of rain drumming on the roof. This needs more blue, Nina said, adding a drop of food coloring to their mixture. What do you think, Alex? More blue or is it perfect? Alex considered the question seriously, then held up 2 fingers. 2 more drops? You got it, color expert. As they worked the dye into the dough, Nina began to sing softly, one of the simple songs they used during their morning sessions. To her delight, Alex began to hum along, matching her pitch with surprising accuracy. You've got a great ear, Nina told him, continuing to knead the dough. I bet you could sing this whole song if you wanted to. Alex looked down at the blue mixture in his hands, his expression turning serious. Nina had learned not to push when he retreated like this, so she simply continued singing, keeping her tone light. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, Alex began to form words along with the melody. They weren't perfect, more like approximations of the lyrics, but they were unmistakably words. Nina's heart raced, but she kept her excitement contained, afraid that any big reaction might cause him to stop. They continued working with the Play-Doh, Nina singing and Alex joining in with whispered fragments of words, growing slightly more confident with each repetition. The kitchen door swung open unexpectedly, and Robert walked in, shaking rain from his umbrella. Meeting canceled due to the storm, he explained. Thought I'd work from... He froze, catching the tail end of Alex's soft singing before the boy fell abruptly silent. The 3 of them remained still for a long moment, the only sound the steady patter of rain against the windows. Then Robert spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Was he? Nina nodded, placing a gentle hand on Alex's shoulder. We were just having a little sing-along while making our Play-Doh. Alex has a wonderful sense of rhythm. Robert set his umbrella aside and slowly approached the kitchen island where they were working. Would it be okay if I joined you? Alex didn't look up, but he shifted slightly to make room at the counter. Nina took this as a positive sign. We'd love that, she said, pushing a ball of blue dough toward Robert. We're making planets for our space theme this week. Alex is working on Neptune. Robert rolled up his sleeves and began to shape his portion of dough. I'm not very artistic, he admitted, but I can try. Nina restarted the song, her voice clear and inviting. For several minutes, Alex remained silent, his small hands working methodically on his blue planet. Then, as the chorus came around again, he rejoined softly. Robert's hands stilled as he listened to his son's whispered singing. Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back quickly, not wanting to disrupt the moment. When Nina nodded encouragingly, he began to hum along, his deep voice providing a bass line to their melody. For 20 minutes, they worked and sang together, creating a solar system out of colorful dough. The rain continued to fall outside, cocooning them in their private world of music and creativity. When they finished, Alex had sung more words than he had in the past 2 years combined. That was amazing, Robert said afterward, as Alex arranged the planets on a tray to dry overnight. Nina smiled. He's been building up to this. The drum exercises, the humming, it's all been preparation. Speech is complex. Sometimes kids need to find alternate routes to get there. I had no idea, Robert admitted. When I watch you two together, it seems so natural, so easy. It's not always easy, Nina replied. But it's about creating safe spaces where communication feels good, not scary or pressured. She hesitated, then added, "He loves when you're part of it, you know." Robert glanced at his son, who was carefully spacing out the planets in their proper order from the sun. "I'm not sure about that. He seems to freeze up whenever I'm around. Because he can sense your anxiety," Nina explained gently. "Kids are like emotional sponges. When you're worried about whether he'll speak, that pressure makes it harder for him to try." Robert considered this. "So I should just, what? Pretend it doesn't matter to me if he ever speaks again?" "No," Nina said. "Just be present with him where he is right now. Play. Have fun. Connection first, communication will follow." The next morning, Nina was surprised to find Robert in the kitchen when she came down for breakfast. He was already dressed for work, but instead of his usual rush out the door, he was setting up bowls of fruit and yogurt. "I moved my first meeting to 9, he explained. "Thought I might join you for morning music time if that's okay." Nina's smile widened. "More than okay. Alex will be thrilled." When Alex appeared, he stopped short at the sight of his father sitting at the breakfast table, clearly confused by the break in routine. "Good morning, buddy," Robert said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Nina mentioned you guys do music after breakfast. Thought maybe I could check it out today." Alex looked to Nina, who nodded encouragingly. "Your dad said he used to play guitar in college. Maybe he could show us some chords sometime." This was news to Alex, whose eyes widened slightly as he slid into his chair. Throughout breakfast, he kept stealing glances at his father, as if trying to imagine him playing an instrument. Later in the playroom, Nina set up 3 drums in their circle. "Since we have a special guest today, I thought we'd try our conversation game with 3 people." She demonstrated, tapping out a simple pattern that Robert repeated, followed by Alex. They continued around the circle, each person adding new elements to the rhythm. To Nina's delight, Alex began adding vocal sounds to his drum patterns, nothing as advanced as the previous day's singing, but definite intentional vocalizations. The normally immaculate Robert, still in his business shirt though he'd discarded his tie, became increasingly engaged. By the end of the session, his sleeves were rolled up, his forehead slightly damp, and he was laughing as he struggled to keep up with a particularly complex pattern Alex had created. You win, he conceded, dropping his hands dramatically. "You're the rhythm champion." Alex's face lit up with a smile. Not the small, cautious turns of his lips Nina had seen before, but a full, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. And then, clear as a bell in the sudden quiet, came a single word. "Stay." The word hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Robert's breath caught, and for a moment he seemed unable to move. He began, his voice breaking. "Alex, Nina stepped in smoothly. "That's a great idea, Alex. Should we all have a picnic lunch in the garden later? If your dad can stay, of course." Alex nodded vigorously, his eyes fixed on his father. Robert swallowed hard. "Yes," he said finally, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Yes, I can stay." He turned away slightly, composing a quick message. "Just need to reschedule a few things." As Robert typed on his phone, Nina caught Alex's eye and gave him a thumbs up. The boy's response was a smile so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire room. A smile that said, clearer than any words could, that something fundamental had shifted in their little world. Outside, the clouds from yesterday's storm had cleared, leaving behind a sky of perfect blue. In the garden where they would later have their picnic, drops of rainwater still clung to leaves and flower petals, catching the sunlight like tiny prisms, scattering rainbows across the green lawn. A fitting backdrop, Nina thought, for this day of small but significant breakthroughs. Autumn leaves drifted past the kitchen window as Nina stirred a pot of soup on the stove. 3 months had passed since she'd moved into Robert's home, and the changes in both father and son were remarkable. Alex now spoke in short sentences, his voice still soft but growing more confident each day. Robert had rearranged his work schedule to be home by 4 most afternoons, joining them for what they'd come to call family time before dinner. The house itself had transformed as well. Where once it had felt like a museum, beautiful but untouchable, it now bore evidence of life in every room. Children's artwork adorned the refrigerator. A half-finished puzzle occupied the coffee table, Musical instruments sat ready for impromptu jam sessions in the living room. Nina hummed as she chopped vegetables, reflecting on how completely her life had changed. Her coursework was going well. She'd even started a research project based on her work with Alex. Her professors were impressed with her practical application of therapeutic techniques, and she was on track to graduate ahead of schedule. The sound of the mail slot clattering drew her attention. Setting down her knife, she went to collect the day's delivery. Mostly business correspondence for Robert, a few catalogs, and an official-looking envelope addressed to her. Nina's heart skipped as she recognized the logo in the corner, the International Speech Therapy Institute in London. Months ago, before meeting Robert and Alex, she'd applied for their prestigious fellowship program, never expecting to be considered. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. "Dear Ms. Chen," she read, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the International Speech Therapy Fellowship for the coming academic year." Nina sank into a chair, reading and rereading the letter. A fully funded year studying with the world's leading experts in her field. The opportunity to work with children from around the globe, a chance to contribute to cutting-edge research that could help countless families. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of professionally, and it was impossible. How could she leave Alex now, when he was making such progress? How could she walk away from the trust they'd built, the delicate balance they'd created in this once broken home? Nina was still sitting there, letter in hand, when Robert's car pulled into the driveway. She hastily tucked the envelope into her pocket as he and Alex came through the door, their arms full of grocery bags. "We got everything on the list," Robert announced proudly. "Plus ice cream because someone got a gold star in speech practice today." Alex beamed, setting his bags on the counter. "I said all my R sounds right. That's wonderful," Nina exclaimed, pushing her troubling thoughts aside to focus on the moment. "What flavor ice cream did you choose?" "Chocolate chip," Alex replied, the cheech sound still a bit soft but clear enough. "For all of us." "Perfect choice." Nina ruffled his hair affectionately. "How about you help me finish the soup while your dad puts the groceries away?" As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Alex carefully adding measured spices, Robert organizing the pantry, Nina stirring and tasting, she felt a pang of impending loss so sharp it was almost physical. This easy domesticity, this sense of belonging. How could she give it up, even for her dream opportunity? That night, after Alex was asleep, Nina found Robert in his study. Unlike the early days when the door remained firmly closed, he now kept it partially open in the evenings, a silent invitation for conversation. "Got a minute?" she asked, hovering in the doorway. Robert looked up from his computer with a smile. "For you?" "Always." Nina entered, clutching the letter in her hand. "Something came in the mail today." She passed the envelope to him, watching as he read its contents. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a complicated mix of emotions. "This is incredible," he said finally. "A huge honor. Congratulations." "Thank you," Nina replied quietly. "When would it start?" "January. 6 weeks from now." Robert nodded slowly, his eyes returning to the letter. "Full funding. Housing allowance. Even a stipend for research materials." He looked up at her. "It's perfect." "I'm not going to accept it," Nina said firmly. Robert set the letter down. "Nina, you have to." "No, I don't. Alex needs consistency right now. We're making so much progress. I can apply again in a few years when he's..." "When he's what?" Robert interrupted gently. "When he doesn't need you anymore? That might be never. You've become so important to both of us." The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken feelings that had been growing over the past months. "That's exactly why I can't go," Nina insisted. "We're a team now. The three of us." Robert stood and moved around the desk to face her directly. "Which is why you have to go. Because teams support each other's dreams, and this has been yours for as long as I've known you." "Dreams change," Nina countered. "People change. What I want now isn't the same as what I wanted when I applied for this." "Maybe not," Robert conceded. "But you'll always wonder what might have been. I don't want you to wake up 5 years from now resenting us for holding you back." "I could never," Nina began, but Robert shook his head. "You say that now, but opportunities like this don't come around often. If you turn it down for us, that's a burden I don't want either of us to carry." Nina felt tears threatening and fought to keep her voice steady. What about Alex? How do I tell him I'm leaving for a year? We'll tell him together, Robert said. We'll make sure he understands that you're coming back, that this doesn't change how much you care about him. He hesitated, then added softly, we'll figure out a way to keep you in his life, even from across the ocean. Nina looked at him skeptically. And you? You'll go back to working 80-hour weeks, eating takeout at your desk, never taking time for music or art or… No, Robert interrupted firmly. That part of my life is over. You've shown me what I was missing by burying myself in work. I won't go back to that, whether you're here or not. Nina wasn't convinced. Alex will need someone while I'm gone. Someone trained, someone who understands his specific challenges. I've already been researching options, Robert admitted, gesturing to his computer screen where a document titled Speech Therapy Continuity Plan was open. I started the day after you mentioned this fellowship program in passing last month. I could tell from how you talked about it that it was important to you. Nina was momentarily speechless. You've been planning for this? Without even knowing if I'd be accepted? I believe in being prepared, Robert said with a small smile. And I believed in you even if you weren't sure yourself. Nina sank into a chair, emotional exhaustion washing over her. I need time to think about this. Of course, Robert agreed. But the acceptance deadline is soon, right? Don't let it pass without serious consideration. The next few days were agonizing for Nina. She went through her routines with Alex mechanically, her mind constantly returning to the decision that loomed before her. Several times she nearly told Alex about the fellowship, but the words stuck in her throat. It was Alex himself who finally brought it up in his direct, unfiltered way. You're sad, he observed one afternoon as they worked on a puzzle together. Because of the letter? Nina's head snapped up in surprise. What letter, sweetie? The one that made you cry in the kitchen? Dad says it's about a special school far away. Nina shot a look at Robert, who was reading in an armchair across the room. He met her gaze with an apologetic shrug. He asked why you seemed upset, Robert explained. I didn't think it was right to lie to him. Nina turned back to Alex, choosing her words carefully. Yes, I got invited to a special school. It would help me learn more about how to help kids like you. In London, Alex added. That's very far. It is, Nina agreed, her heart breaking at his solemn expression. It would be for 1 year. Alex was quiet for a long moment, fitting another puzzle piece into place. Will you come back? Of course I would, Nina assured him, reaching out to touch his hand. I would miss you and your dad too much to stay away forever. Alex considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. You should go, he said finally. What? Nina asked, sure she'd misheard. You should go, Alex repeated, more confidently this time. Dad says it's your dream, and you helped me with my dreams, so we should help you with yours. Nina felt tears well in her eyes, but I'd miss so much. Your first day of first grade, your spring concert, all those important moments. We can talk on the computer, Alex said practically, and you can come visit. Right, Dad? Robert, who had set aside his book to listen to their conversation, nodded. Absolutely. We could even plan a trip to London during your school break. Alex's face lit up at this idea. Can we see the big clock tower? And the guards with the fuzzy hats? All of it, Robert promised. Every tourist cliché in the book. Nina looked between them, these two people who had become her family in such a short time. You're both really okay with this? With me going? No, Robert said honestly. We'll miss you terribly, but we're okay with supporting you, the way you've supported us. That evening, after Alex was in bed, Nina found Robert on the back patio, gazing up at the stars. She joined him, wrapping her cardigan tightly around herself against the autumn chill. I think I'm going to accept the fellowship, she said quietly. Robert nodded, still looking upward. I think that's the right decision, but I have conditions, Nina continued. Weekly video calls with Alex at minimum, and I want detailed updates from whoever you hire to continue his therapy. Already arranged, Robert assured her. I've been in touch with Dr. Lynn from the Children's Center. She specializes in cases like Alex's and is willing to come to the house 3 times a week. Nina raised an eyebrow. You've been busy. Like I said, I believe in being prepared. Robert finally turned to look at her. I also set up a fund in your name. A what? A scholarship fund, Robert explained. for speech therapy students who want to work with traumatized children. The board of trustees at your college was quite enthusiastic about it. Nina stared at him, speechless for once. I thought it might be a way to extend the work you've done with Alex, Robert continued, to help more children even while you're focused on your studies. That's incredible, Nina managed finally. But it's too much. You've already done so much for me. Robert shook his head. No, you've done so much for us. This is just my way of paying it forward. He paused, then added softly, and maybe giving you a reason to come back when your fellowship is over. The implication hung in the air between them. Nina felt her heart race as Robert's gaze held hers in the starlight. I don't need a scholarship fund as a reason to come back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No? No. She took a deep breath. But it might be nice to have something waiting for me. Something professional, I mean. When I return, Robert smiled. I think that could be arranged. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching their breath form small clouds in the cool night air. Alex really surprised me today, Nina said eventually. The way he handled the news, the maturity he showed. He gets that from his mother, Robert replied, a hint of nostalgia in his tone. She was always the level-headed one, always thinking of others before herself. He's lucky to have had her influence, even if it was too brief, Nina said gently. And he's lucky to have you. He's lucky to have both of us, Robert corrected, in whatever form that takes going forward. As they turned to go inside, Robert placed a hand lightly on the small of her back, a gesture of support, of connection, of possibilities yet unexplored. Nina felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with her lingering sadness. Whatever happened next, she knew that the bonds they'd formed these past months were strong enough to withstand distance and time. Upstairs, Alex stirred in his sleep, dreaming perhaps of London bridges and fuzzy-hatted guards. In the quiet house, as autumn leaves continued their gentle descent in the garden outside, 3 separate lives that had unexpectedly intertwined now faced a crossroads, each of them changed, each of them stronger, each of them ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The winter evening was clear and crisp, stars twinkling like diamonds against the dark sky. Inside Robert's home, warmth and light spilled from every window. The normally quiet house hummed with conversation and laughter as a small gathering of people mingled in the spacious living room. Nina stood in the kitchen, arranging a platter of fruit while stealing glances at the clock. In just 12 hours, she would board a plane to London. Her bags were packed, her apartment sublet, her affairs in order. Everything was ready except her heart, which seemed determined to stay firmly rooted in this house with these people. Need a hand with that? Dr. Lin appeared beside her, reaching for another serving dish. Nina smiled gratefully at the older woman who would be taking over Alex's therapy during her absence. Over the past month, they'd worked closely together to ensure a smooth transition. Dr. Lin was experienced, kind, and, most importantly, Alex approved of her. Thanks. I think I'm moving in slow motion tonight. Perfectly understandable, Dr. Lin replied. Saying goodbye is never easy, even when it's temporary. From the living room came the sound of Alex's laughter, a sound that still made Nina's heart soar every time she heard it. He was showing his grandmother how to play one of the hand-clapping games Nina had taught him, his small voice patiently explaining the pattern. He's come so far, Dr. Lin commented, following Nina's gaze. You've done remarkable work with him. Nina shook her head. He did the work. I just gave him the tools. Don't underestimate your contribution, Dr. Lin insisted gently. That child found his voice because you showed him it was safe to use it. Before Nina could respond, Robert entered the kitchen carrying an empty tray. The appetizers have been devoured, he announced. Apparently, speech therapists and software engineers share a common love for tiny foods on toothpicks. Nina laughed, handing him the fruit platter. Here's reinforcement. And remind your mother that Alex needs to be in bed by 8. It's already past his normal bedtime. Yes, ma'am, Robert said with a mock salute, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. All evening he'd been putting on a brave face, but Nina could see the strain beneath his cheerful exterior. As Robert returned to his guests, Dr. Lin touched Nina's arm. I should go mingle. But remember what I said. You've made a difference here that will last long after you've gone to London. Left alone in the kitchen, Nina took a deep breath, steeling herself against the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. This going-away party had been Robert's idea. A celebration, he'd insisted, not a sad occasion. Nina's professors were there, along with a few colleagues from her study group. Robert's mother had flown in from Arizona. Even the owner of the Blue Plate Diner had stopped by with a care package of Nina's favorite cookies. It was a lovely gesture, bringing together the various threads of her life. But it also made leaving that much harder. "Nina?" Alex's small voice came from the doorway. "Are you hiding?" She turned to find him watching her with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see right through adult pretenses. "Not hiding," she assured him. "Just taking a little break from all the talking." He nodded seriously. "Me too. Grandma keeps touching my hair and saying how big I've got." Nina smiled. "Grandmas do that. It's in their job description." Alex came to stand beside her, leaning against the counter in a miniature mirror of her posture. "Dad's acting weird." "Weird how?" "Like he's trying too hard to smile. Like when he has a headache but says he's fine." Nina's heart clenched at the child's observation. "Well, he's probably sad about me leaving tomorrow, just like you and I are sad. But he's trying to be happy for me too, because this trip is important for my work." Alex considered this. It's complicated when you feel two things at the same time. "Very complicated," Nina agreed. "That's why grown-ups sometimes act weird." A comfortable silence fell between them. Then Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I made this for you," he said, suddenly shy. "For when you're in London." Nina unfolded the paper to find a carefully drawn picture of 3 stick figures, a tall one with spiky hair labeled Dad, a smaller one labeled Me, and a medium-sized one with a big smile labeled Nina. They were all holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. "It's beautiful," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Dad helped me find a frame for it," Alex continued. "It's in the blue bag by the door, so you can put it in your new room and remember us." "As if I could forget," Nina said, kneeling down to his level. "I'll look at it every single day." Alex nodded solemnly. "And we'll talk on the computer. Dad set up the big screen in the den so I can see you really well." "That's right. Every Sunday morning, which will be evening for me in London. And we're coming to visit at Easter," Alex added. "Dad already bought the tickets. I have my own seat on the airplane." "I can't wait," Nina told him honestly. "I'm going to plan all kinds of fun things for us to do together." From the living room, someone called Alex's name. "That's Grandma," he sighed. "She probably wants to touch my hair again," Nina laughed. "Better go see what she wants. I'll be right out." As Alex turned to leave, he suddenly stopped and spun back around. Before Nina could react, he threw his arms around her in a fierce hug. "I love you, Nina," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Nina held him tightly, committing to memory the feel of his small body in her arms. "I love you too, Alex, so very much." He pulled away just as quickly, suddenly embarrassed by his display of emotion. With a small wave, he darted out of the kitchen, leaving Nina to collect herself before rejoining the party. The evening wore on, with toasts and well-wishes and promises to stay in touch. Nina moved through it all in a kind of daze, one part of her already on the plane to London, while another desperately catalogued every detail of the home and people she was leaving behind. As the guests began to depart, Robert's mother insisted on taking Alex upstairs for his bedtime routine. "You two need some time to say your goodbyes. Properly," she said with a knowing look at her son, and Nina. "We'll be reading stories for at least half an hour when—" The last guest had gone and Robert's mother had disappeared upstairs with Alex. An unaccustomed silence fell over the house. Robert and Nina stood in the foyer, suddenly awkward with each other after months of easy companionship. "Thank you for the party," Nina said finally. "It was really thoughtful." "Everyone wanted to wish you well," Robert replied. "You've touched a lot of lives here, not just ours." Nina glanced toward the staircase. "I should go up and say goodnight to Alex before he falls asleep." "Wait," Robert said, touching her arm. "There's something I want to show you first." He led her to his study where a large gift box sat on his desk. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside, Nina found a leather-bound book. The cover was embossed with the title, Our Story, in elegant gold lettering. Opening it, she discovered page after page of photographs, handwritten notes and mementos chronicling her time with Robert and Alex. Their first pancake dinner at the Blue Plate, Alex's breakthrough with the drums. Holiday celebrations. Ordinary moments made extraordinary through the lens of their shared journey. Robert, she breathed, turning the pages with reverent fingers. This is incredible. Alex helped, Robert explained. He chose a lot of the pictures, and he dictated some of the captions to me. He paused, then added softly, "He's been practicing reading them aloud." Nina looked up sharply. "Reading? But he's just starting to recognize basic sight words." Robert smiled. "He's been getting some extra practice. He wanted to surprise you before you left." "That's why he's been so secretive about bedtime lately," Nina realized. "I thought he was just asserting his independence." "Partly that," Robert agreed. "But mostly he's been determined to read this book to you tonight, as a going-away present." As if on cue, they heard small footsteps on the stairs. Alex appeared in the study doorway in his pajamas, hair damp from his bath. "Grandma said I could come down for 10 more minutes, he announced. "Did you show her the book, Dad?" "I was just looking at it," Nina told him. "It's beautiful." "I can read it," Alex said proudly. "Do you want to hear?" Nina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They settled on the small sofa in the corner of the study, Alex between them with the book open on his lap. "Our story," he began, his finger carefully tracing each word. "Once there was a boy who didn't talk. He was sad because his mom had gone to heaven." Nina and Robert exchanged glances over Alex's head, both fighting emotion as the child continued. The boy's dad was sad too. He tried to help but didn't know how. Alex turned the page where a photograph of the Blue Plate diner was carefully mounted. Then they met a nice lady at a restaurant. She made the boy feel safe. She helped him remember how to talk. Page by page, Alex read their story, sometimes stumbling over words, sometimes filling in details not written on the page. Nina and Robert gently helped when needed, but mostly they just listened in wonder as Alex narrated the journey that had brought them together. When he reached the final page, Alex looked up at Nina. "Now it's your turn to write the next part," he said. "About London and all your new adventures." "I will," Nina promised. "And when you come visit me, we'll add those stories too." "It doesn't end," Alex explained seriously. "The book. Dad says we can add more pages." "That's right," Robert confirmed, his voice husky with emotion. "This story isn't ending. It's just starting a new chapter." Alex yawned suddenly, the excitement of the evening catching up with him. Robert's mother appeared in the doorway. "Time for sleep, young man," she said firmly. "You can see Nina in the morning before she leaves." After a round of hugs and a promise of pancakes for breakfast, Alex reluctantly went upstairs with his grandmother, leaving Robert and Nina alone once more. "He's amazing," Nina said softly. "Do you have any idea how rare it is for a child who was nonverbal just months ago to be reading at that level now?" "I have some idea," Robert replied. "His therapist keeps using words like remarkable and unprecedented." He smiled wryly. "But I think the real miracle was finding you." Nina shook her head. "It was always in him. He just needed the right conditions to bloom." "Like we all do," Robert said thoughtfully. A comfortable silence fell between them as Nina continued to leaf through the book, pausing occasionally to touch a photograph or read a caption. When she reached the final page, she noticed something tucked into a small envelope attached to the inside back cover. "What's this?" she asked, carefully opening it. Inside was a letter on Horizon Software letterhead. Nina's eyes widened as she scanned its contents. "The Nina Chen Foundation for Therapeutic Communication?" she read aloud, looking up at Robert in confusion. "What is this?" "Something I've been working on," he explained. "A non-profit organization dedicated to developing and distributing resources for children with communication challenges, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds who can't afford private therapy." Nina stared at him, speechless. "The foundation will fund research, provide scholarships for speech therapy students, and develop accessible tools for families," Robert continued. "The board of directors includes Dr. Lin and several of your professors. And there's a position waiting for you when you return from London if you want it." "If I want it?" Nina repeated incredulously. "Robert, this is everything I've ever wanted to do." "I know," he said simply. "That's why I did it. But the resources required for something like this are resources I happen to have," Robert finished for her. "Nina, you've given Alex and me something priceless. Let me give you this in return. Nina stood up abruptly, pacing the study as she tried to process what he was offering. But what if I'm not qualified? What if the fellowship doesn't go well? What if— Nina, Robert interrupted gently, coming to stand before her. You're the most qualified person I know. Not just because of your education, but because of who you are. The foundation is yours whether you take the position or not. But I hope you will. Because— He hesitated, then continued. Because we want you to come home to us. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Home, Nina repeated softly. Yes, Robert confirmed. If you want it to be. Nina looked into his eyes, seeing the invitation there, not just to return to a job, not just to continue working with Alex, but to become part of something permanent. Something family-shaped. I do, she said finally. Want that, I mean. Robert's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good, because I'm pretty sure neither of us would survive if you didn't come back. Well, we can't have that, Nina replied, her own smile tremulous but genuine. Especially since Alex still has the inside of this book to fill. Speaking of which, Robert reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. This isn't what you think, he said quickly, seeing her startled expression. Or maybe it is eventually. But for now, he opened the box to reveal a delicate silver key on a chain. It's a key to the house, he explained. So you always know you have a home to come back to. No pressure, no expectations, just a door that's always open to you. Nina took the box with trembling fingers. It's perfect, she whispered. Robert gently lifted the key from its velvet nest and fastened the chain around her neck. The key rested just below her collarbone, catching the light as it rose and fell with her breath. There, he said softly. Now a part of you stays here, and a part of here goes with you. Outside, a gentle snow began to fall, dusting the windows with lacy patterns of frost. Tomorrow would bring farewells, an airport, a flight across an ocean. But tonight, in this moment, Nina allowed herself to simply be present, to feel the weight of the key against her skin, to see the love in Robert's eyes, to know that somewhere upstairs Alex slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their story was far from over. As Robert's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a promise more binding than words, Nina thought about beginnings and endings, how sometimes they were the same thing viewed from different angles, how a chance encounter at a diner could change the trajectory of 3 lives, how healing could come in unexpected packages, how love could build bridges across oceans, across silence, across pain. The mansion, once filled with echoing silence and grief, now hummed with possibilities. And as the snow continued to fall, wrapping the world in a blanket of quiet beauty, Nina knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by understanding, by the courage to be vulnerable, and by the simple, profound miracle of finding one's voice.